Hi, and thank you for joining us for this live webinar session on how to be a helpful leader without losing focus and buy-in. My name is Francis Vidgen. I'm a co-founder here at KnowAtom and CEO. I'm also a former teacher, a high school math teacher, and a elementary and middle school STEM specialist. We're going to spend the next hour taking a look at 4 key areas in relation to really this transitional change and implementation from a team focus and buy-in perspective when it comes to the next generation science standards. The 4 areas we're going to look at is establishing the foundation for success with the NGSS. And if you're not specifically adopting NGSS but a flavor of NGSS, you're going to find all of this applies to you as well. How to define what matters and what doesn't. A look at the keys to managing expectations and compromise as the transition sort of takes place. And keep in mind as well that these, a lot of these things that we're going to be talking about are not only unique to next generation science standards, but really the movement across the board to performance-based teaching and learning. And recovering from mistakes. Inevitably mistakes happen, and thinking about that from a leadership position, we're going to take a look at how those pieces break down. All right, so to give you a little quick background on KnowAtom, we believe that science and engineering is the key area in the curriculum where we can pull all disciplines together and really teach students higher order thinking skills, the creative, evaluative, and analytical thinking skills that are useful in any college or career. And so in order to do that in the context of the next generation science standards, or STEM in general, is really to put the students in the role of scientist and engineer. That way they're experiencing the context, they're using the practices, and getting experience with the processes of actually developing and using that content. And so that does get into materials and curriculum and professional development and things like that. But first and foremost, it really has to do with the purpose of science and engineering in the curriculum. You know, we don't expect, or nobody really expects all students to become scientists and engineers. And that's really where I want to jump into this concept of the next generation science standards. You see, the next generation science standards are teaching science, technology, engineering, and math as a kind of cycle. They are bringing the pieces together in a very new way and redefining them in a way that most educators haven't thought about. So as we think about being helpful leaders without losing focus and buy-in, the first and foremost piece here is to know what the next generation science standards actually are, what they represent, and even at a very foundational level, what science is and what it isn't, as well as engineering, what it is and what it isn't. Okay? The same is true of the relationship between technology and math. So just to give you the real quick here, science as it relates to these next generation science standards is knowledge from experimentation. That knowledge from experimentation is scientific knowledge, and engineers use that to solve problems. Okay, so the engineers use their knowledge of science to solve problems that they identify by developing prototype solutions. They test those solutions and they use the data to reflect on whether or not it actually solves the problem. Should it be scaled up or replicated? If that's the case, it becomes, that prototype is no longer a prototype when it's scaled up. It becomes a technology. Okay, and that technology then enables scientists to ask new questions, and that's the thing, science emanates from a question. So new questions that we can form hypotheses about, develop experiments to test, and those experiments will yield data that yields conclusions, which are the new pieces of knowledge. And so you can see this cycle kind of goes around and around and around, and the role of math being a way of capturing observations quantitatively, communicating those, analyzing those, and really being able to form data-based conclusions about how that question is answered. The hypothesis, whether it is true or false, or we might say supported or not supported as a result of the experiment. So this is a foundational shift, something we need to think about that as leaders we need to be aware of, but also we need to be communicating to our teams, because there's going to be this major shift from a traditional model of STEM instruction where content has to flow through a teacher, and then the idea that the teacher's role is to be the specialist, the sage, that models facts and explains what and demonstrates phenomena to students, whose job as a student is to recalling facts, repeating demonstration, or summarizing phenomenon. So that traditional model under these new standards is going away, and that's going to create a bit of upset. And let's take a look at what that new model really looks like. It looks like teachers in the role of tuning an inquiry environment. So what we mean by that is students will have to develop the science and engineering practice skills to interact with the content. And so the student's job is going to be to attend to precision and ask questions and identify problems and these sort of practice skills, which are things that the teacher is going to have to help the student understand what those skills are and how to appropriately engage in them. However, the student is going to be developing and using content in a context in that classroom, because these new standards are performance expectations. Okay, so that's why you see on the left that content and cross-cutting concepts are kind of in a bin together, and the students are in a bin together with the practice skills, because those practice skills are a way of accessing content. Okay, and these cross-cutting concepts. The cross-cutting concepts are a light version of systems thinking. It's really the dynamics of how content interacts between different disciplines and even within the same discipline. Okay, and now you see that teacher connection both to the content and cross-cutting concepts and to the student, because as they tune this environment, they are not only helping the student to sort of understand and develop their skills and their role as the scientist or engineer, but to help sort of adjust the supports around the content. There may be some scaffolding, there may be sort of different pieces like that where, in order to meet student needs and in order to sort of facilitate the development of skills, the teacher is sort of adjusting supports on both sides. The expectations of a student are very different in this next generation model as well. Those expectations really focus on students developing and using the content, but using skills to be able to solve problems and answer questions. That's really foundationally where this all stems from. If you think back to that STEM cycle, scientists ask questions, and then they answer those questions through experimentation, and that means defining hypotheses and developing an experiment, gathering data, and so on. So a student is going to be required to demonstrate those skills. They are also going to not only be required to understand or remember content, they're going to have to be able to describe it in terms of its dynamic interactions with, one piece of content with another. So what I'm trying to set you up for here is understanding that these next generation science standards represent a lot of change. And so as a leader, whether you're a teacher leader or an administrative leader, you need to understand that there's a lot of very foundational shifting that's going to go on here between a rote recall model, which can get by. And the thing is it's not to, I don't say that to accuse people of rote recall models of instruction. It exists. It is how people are typically taught. Now, the thing is that even within inquiry environments, there's a lot of times, demonstrating phenomenon can be something that is considered acceptable in what might be called an inquiry environment. But inquiry really has to do with students developing specific inquiry skills, and really, in this case, science and engineering practices. And that's why the next generation science standards have broken content, cross-cutting concepts, and practices into 3 separate dimensions and have been very specific about what those things are and are not. So as these shifts happen, there's going to be a lot of change and to manage, and also potentially confusion and expectations that become misaligned, and a need to really question and synchronize over the course of the coming months and the next couple of years, really our approach to all of these new standards. Okay, so one of these key pieces that we need to consider is the new definition of effective STEM instruction. That it's not really new in a lot of ways. It's sort of developed by the National Research Council back in 2011, but it's something that's very clearly reflected in the new standards, and have, as the National Research Council process has sort of had this kind of trickle-down effect to what has become the next generation science standards in the multi-state sort of collaboration. Effective STEM instruction, and I'm just going to read it because this is intentional language that they developed. Effective STEM instruction capitalizes on students' early interests and experiences, identifies and builds on what they know, and provides them with experiences to engage them, the students, in the practices of science and sustain their interest. So the idea that a traditional model of STEM instruction can exist is pretty clearly removed here. Effective STEM instruction capitalizes on early interest and experiences, so it's not something that only happens in a test year. It's not something that only happens in middle school. It's something that starts early in preschool, in kindergarten, and first grade, and is an intentional nurturing process all the way through grade 12. It identifies and builds on what they know. That is their nurturing process vertically from pre-K to 12, but it's also September through June. It's an intentional scaffolding of concepts, and it's providing them with the experiences to engage in the practices. Those practices, that's an intentional word, it's skills. If students are observing a demonstration, they are not engaging in the practices. The students on the left in this image are not engaging in the practices. The students in the right are, because in the right, they're engaged as scientists and engineers. They're not mirroring anything back. They're not going to repeat what was told to them. They're actually going to engage as scientists and engineers. So that's an important sort of distinction here. And then, of course, having a scope and sequence which sustains student interest over time. So moving away from that 3-unit-a-year model where rocks and minerals is something we do for months and months and months, there's actually an awful lot of very dynamic content that is outside of the context of rocks and minerals that we have to be getting to. And so that really is going to require rethinking how we provide these experiences, how we position students as scientists and engineers in the classroom in this next generation inquiry environment, but also how we sustain student interest. And that's especially key as students start to transition out of the early grade levels where we are so attuned with student interest, and perhaps lose that at the middle school level as we focus more and more on explaining content and less with interacting and really unpacking it with students in that role. So what I'd like to take a look at now is not so much the next generation science standards, which we have just sort of discussed and sort of set the stage for the challenges ahead, but really how we go about managing this change in the context of our teaching teams, our school buildings, or even our districts. So what I'd like to look at is first why, then what, and then how. Okay, so really the focus here is what matters. And so maybe picture yourself with your team really sitting down and asking, why does our school, why does our classroom, why does our district exist? What are the things that we value? What are the core beliefs that we have that gives us a real purpose in existing here as a team? And again, you can scale this to kind of different levels, whether it's a school building or an entire district. Now the thing is that a team in this context is really more than just 2 people. We're talking about 5 to 150 people. And buildings really are the ones that sort of set values. So if you can kind of think about this as a district being made of school buildings, the values tend to emerge from those individual buildings themselves, because as these teams of teachers are working together, what happens is there becomes a unified purpose and unified core beliefs. And that is what really defines the culture and the climate of that building. And that's why you can look out over a district and you can find buildings with very, very different climate and culture, and as a result, very different results. And I don't mean results only in sort of a quantitative sense, but also in a qualitative sense. Engagement of both teachers and administrators and parents and children. So values are huge, and if you sit down and ask your team about these values, your team might say, well, we value things like, or why we exist is for things like rigor, literacy, thinking and reasoning, growth, engagement, achievement, data, community, all these sort of things. But it's very important to think about values in terms of why we exist as being something that's bigger than ourselves, okay? And this is where it gets very real. It's important that the values are things that are limitless, in a sense. They're bigger than ourselves. They are things that are so big that we can't achieve them on our own. They're actually something that we value so much that we realize that they're something that we need each other to achieve. That we're part of a continuum, really, where things like thinking and reasoning, it's why our school exists, is to develop the thinking and reasoning of our students, and to be able to develop students' higher order thinking skills, to create analytical and evaluative thinkers who can create. Those are things that's not a once and done. It's not something we can check a box. It's something that really has infinite potential, and it's bigger than ourselves, because as a third grade teacher or as a 10th grade teacher, we get 1 year with these students. But by banding together with our teams and in our buildings, suddenly we form this nurturing process, really, from pre-K all the way through grade 12, that's preparing these children for something that's limitless for their future. And so that's really a key in maintaining focus and buy-in, is first to be a helpful leader by helping teams to convene with discussions around values, and to really identify what the limitless things are that bring everyone together. Okay, so the reason I highlighted these things below is that these are the things which are really limitless. We actually asked this question to dozens of educators in one district, and this is the diversity of answers that came back. Rigor is not really something that is bigger than ourselves and limitless. Literacy is not something that's limitless and bigger than ourselves. Those are things that are actually part of other things that are limitless. So for instance, rigor is part of growth. Thinking and reasoning literacy may be part of thinking and reasoning, may be part of engagement, but thinking and reasoning is the sort of the highest level of value from which these other things sort of fall. Okay. Now, I don't want to be sort of sounding too out there. What I want you to realize is that these values are become very concrete in the sense that we are looking for values that we all share. So picture 3 team members that might be on your team, Tim, John, and Mary. They're each going to value really big things, but only a few of them are going to be in common. And so it's those things that we have in common which become the values of our schools, of our districts, and specifically get carried into our classrooms. And so the role of values here is to really unite all of us in our building and in our district around things that we all believe at our core. And when we think of core beliefs, it's important that we think about things that are things that we would fight for, in a sense. And that, I'm not saying fists fighting, but really things that we fight for, that we believe in our core is the purpose of why we are teachers, or why we're educators, and not plumbers, and not Wall Street executives, or finance folks or accountants. These are the things that actually anchor us as teachers in our classrooms. Okay, and we're going to see why this is important in a moment, because our values are why we teach, why we're committed to the discipline. But from that flows what we do. It's the actual mode of instruction. And so that mode of instruction has to reflect our values. Now notice I'm saying our values. Over here, we have 3 individuals. By focusing on that overlap, and we could keep putting more individuals in here, okay? And this is part of the problem. The larger school buildings get and the larger districts get, the harder and harder it is to get 150 people coalesce around, 10 overlapping values. But the nice thing is that there tends to be a lot of overlap for teachers because of the nature of the profession. But as the group grows, it's hard to find that overlap. So that's another reason why this climate and culture tends to emerge at a building level. Those values that unite all of us, unite us in terms of the mode of instruction that we consider acceptable. And because they're shared, they are ours. And if we recognize them as such, we can become a self-aware group that then begins to approach instruction in terms of what we are willing to entertain versus not entertain in light of our values. And that's really important, because if something doesn't align to your values, why are you doing it? And you're going to see where that comes into the picture in a second here. But the mode of instruction, and there may be more than one mode of instruction, but it must reflect the values of the school. And by virtue of reflecting the values of the school, it reflects the values of the individuals. And so, again, it's a place where we can all connect. Now, modes of instruction like test prep are not going to resonate with the values of schools and districts where authentic student-centered instruction is something that's a value. Because test prep is at odds, sort of a drill and kill, print the test and hand it to the students model of test prep is at odds with authentic student-centered instruction. So to participate in that is a violation against the values of the school and of the district. And if it's something as a member of this group that we all share, it's actually a violation of my values as an individual, as a teacher, if I'm engaging in that, as a principal, if I'm promoting it. And so you can see how the values are so important, and the idea that these values are shared. And it also highlights if you bring people into your group who don't share your values, they're necessarily going to have issues. And it means that hiring process and that coaching process really has to center around values and will be reflected in that individual's mode of instruction. So again, it's sort of a grafting in process that happens. And there's other examples too. The idea of developing curriculum with understanding by design versus an ad hoc, patchwork, hunt and find model, or the idea of inquiry versus textbook. These are all things which are, in essence, modes of instruction, but would have to reflect somebody's values. And that's the thing. If we don't focus on our values, then our mode of instruction becomes fractured. And if our modes of instruction becomes fractured, how we actually accomplish our job in the classroom, the details of execution become highly fragmented. And so what happens is that you will see things happening in classrooms that are excellent and in line with what you personally feel is what you value, and modes of instruction you personally feel that you're promoting, and then look to this room next door and find something that's totally out of alignment. And that's because most schools and districts focus on how. They focus on the details of execution, sometimes the modes of instruction, but very rarely the values which unite us all as educators in that building. And the real purpose for which we're all teaching. Okay, and so you can see how this trickles down. And so I would encourage you, as these changes occur, or as you're preparing and thinking about these changes, that you absolutely focus first on really thinking about what you value individually and then also as a group. And so what is it that you value individually that you share with this group, and sort of coming together with that overlapping piece that everyone shares, and then considering how that mode of instruction exists in your school, and does it actually reflect the values that you say you all share, and then thinking about the actual details of the execution. So a mode of so to try and kind of break this out even a little bit more for you, why is the values, the what is really what you accept in terms of acceptable instruction. What is acceptable teaching? And then how is really how you go about that acceptable teaching. So if you say that really the only acceptable teaching is authentic inquiry, and the how, so the details of the execution, is demonstrating and reading a textbook together, and somebody getting up and telling all about, a teacher getting up and telling all about concepts, then that's out of alignment, because authentic inquiry is not just reading. It's not a teacher being a sage and delivering content unilaterally. And you know, the idea that a textbook knowledge all about science or engineering is going to authentically engage students in developing and using their skills in the context of the content. So, you know, that's where you start to see issues of alignment. But when you think about it this way, it's a way of ironing out a lot of those issues. And so asking yourself as a team, once you sort of go through this process of thinking about, or really articulating, because everybody has values, it's just a matter of articulating them, and articulating the modes of instruction, and then sort of looking at whether they reflect the values or not, and then looking to the details of execution. You know, we say we're about this, but are we really doing it? Does it mirror the mode? Does it reflect the mode? Does it reflect the values? And if it doesn't, how do we fix that? Okay, that's the thing. How do we fix it? Sometimes we can't fix it. We have to change totally. We have to abandon and pick up something else and go from there. And that's a big piece in linking the first part of what we discussed with the second part, is that that traditional mode and model of instruction is something that's by and large going to have to be abandoned. And this new next generation model and mode of instruction is something that's going to have to be adopted. And if the values are not recognized, and in fact, if people value things that are contrary to the standards and purpose of performance-based expectations, performance expectations, which is what these next generation science standards represent, and if the resources and materials and professional development do not reflect that, then you've got an issue, okay? And it's something that you need to really dig into. Now, there are keys to managing this type of transition, and it really comes down to expectations and compromise. And the first piece is a little bit of an encore to another webinar that we've had, a discussion around the research into leadership and specifically tribes. I'd like to talk a bit about managing expectations and compromise by first understanding the tribe or tribes that you are a leader of. And if you aren't quite as much of a leader as you'd like to be, how to really become a tribal leader and work with that the why, the what, and the how model. Okay, so let's take a quick look at this. So about 10 years worth of research out of Harvard University by someone named David Logan and a number of his peers really dove into the idea that people self-organize, that people decide to join a group or groups for many different reasons, but really it all comes together around language, and language which represents a kind of worldview that we believe. And these tribal council meetings take place everywhere, every day. They happen in elevators, they happen on sidewalks, they happen on school playgrounds, they happen at Super Bowl parties. These are all sort of informal places where people meet, and yet they connect and they exchange ideas and form these small groups based on language and signals. And so I won't go too much into it, but there's this famous study that David and his peers engaged in where they looked at something like 24,000 people in everything from Super Bowl parties to Fortune 500 companies to government agencies and unions and every other sort of organizational structure, and really tried to dig into how and why people came together. And they really had an astonishing insight that people unite around language. And so that language really, in that worldview, breaks into 5 areas. One is that life is terrible. A second stage is that life is bad. My life is bad specifically. So not all of life is terrible, but my life is terrible. The third stage being that I'm the best and in fact better than these other guys. The fourth is a kind of self-aware level, or where self-awareness begins, where it's the idea and language that we are great. And so that we is key, because it means that it's not that I'm great, but as a group, as a tribe, that we are great. And in fact, greater than some others perhaps out there. Stage 5 is the idea that life is great, or that in fact that life can be great, that there are big issues out there which we can solve, and that I can solve as an individual. And so you see this kind of spectrum, and in David's research, and King and Fisher-Wright, these stages, most people kind of get stuck at stage 3. That's as far as they get. And the stages are something that people can transition through but not skip over. And so this idea that my life is bad is not going to be completely abandoned until somebody, for we are great or life is great kind of concept, until a person has passed through the idea that they're the best. And so these tribes each have their own unique language, their own unique worldview. And what was really interesting from this research was that they can only hear the language one tribe above and one tribe below where they actually find themselves. So that's relevant because a stage 2 tribe, the idea that my life is bad, if somebody comes along saying we are great, we can be great, they can't hear that. They can literally hear it, but they don't feel it. It doesn't resonate with them, and they disengage. So to be a tribal leader, you need to be able to understand and speak the language of these different tribes, but also to be able to speak above it in such a way that you're shifting individuals' language from one to the next. So I'd like to go through real quick and just give you an overview of what each of these tribes are and actually model a little bit of the language for you here. So tribe 1, folks, life is bad. It's a lone wolf, disengaged from society almost type mentality. And unfortunately, this is where a lot of folks, school shooters and these really sort of extreme examples of behavior occur. And they're a very small part of the overall population. And in education, these are people who really don't belong in the profession. They're counseled out of the profession. You see an article about somebody who hits a child. I mean, that is a level 1 tribe member. They don't belong really from a professional standpoint in education. They need remediation. So chances are these are people that you don't have a part of your group. But the folks that you will have a part of your group are the my life is bad folks. And so I'll tell you a quick example of level 2 tribe convenings. So by accident or unknowingly, I flew on an airline, a value airline called Spirit Airlines, and perhaps you've engaged these folks. And I was on my way back. This was the first time I had ever been on Spirit Airlines, and I ended up at Hollywood Fort Lauderdale Airport, where there was cancellation after cancellation and overbooking, and all these folks had gathered against their will, basically, in an airport terminal, and there must have been a dozen planes that had been canceled or delayed, and all of these folks were stuck at 6 to 8 gates, and it was just hundreds upon hundreds of people, and life was bad. Life was bad. There weren't enough bathrooms. There wasn't really any food. It was tough. And what became evident was that the airline and the airport and everybody was not doing anything to make life better. And so what happened was that people really started to band together that life was bad. Some of them in this terminal were sort of a level 1 type folk, and they went over and started threatening lawsuits, and they were screaming and yelling at the gate agent that they could find. Tribe 2 folks who were customers, they were sitting there complaining about how unfortunate that they were finding themselves in the circumstance. And unfortunately, this was breeding a kind of tribal 2 culture among the airline staff because they were running and hiding. The bad sort of culture and practices, the lack of sort of well-rounded values, people were hiding. They were heading out of the gates into secure areas where people who were customers couldn't approach them. And it was a really terrible circumstance. And so what was kind of interesting is that I went on to kind of check out Spirit Airlines and said, wow, look at this. This is really promoting Tribe 2 culture, because look at what you find on Facebook. When you type in Spirit Airlines, the #1 community is Boycott Spirit Airlines with 35,000 followers. People who like the idea of boycotting Spirit Airlines. People have come together as a tribe, and around this "my life is bad" idea, it resonates with them in terms of Spirit Airlines. It has become a sort of icon of life is bad. And you can see that really contrasts with the folks who actually like Spirit Airlines. Only 4,000 like their official site, and then some of these local sites, far fewer people. And so Spirit Airlines is this kind of convening for level 2 folks. And when you look actually at the posts on these sites, they're level 2 tribes coming together. Here they go again, says the official Boycott Spirit Airlines folks. Now the seats won't recline. This has got to be the worst company in the U.S. You can just hear this person sort of feeling my life is bad, you know, and calling other tribal members, come join us in the boycott. And look at how many people like this comment and what they're actually saying. This first person saying, Spirit sucks. Another person, next they're going to charge a fee to pay fees. Someone else says, they'll ask us to moo as cattle as we board too. And this other person, eliminate the I and the R and call it Spit Airlines. It's just unbelievable that these folks are banding together. And so what's interesting is that there's a tribe above this level 3 tribe. So if life isn't bad, you have the folks who leave that tribe and say, I'm better than they are. And in this sort of model of airlines, it would be the folks who are smarter than the folks who got stuck there and had to live it out. So somebody in that airport who said, you know what, I'm not going to deal with Spirit Airlines. I'm going to leave this terminal. I'm going to demand a refund here. I'm going to go buy a ticket for another, you know, higher rated airline that's a value airline but provides better service, and I'm going to be the best, smartest person in this room and go and get myself out of here. And so what do those folks say? Well, it's interesting. So when you go to somebody, you want to find a level 3 tribe member, you can look on Spirit Airlines' page, and you can see the people who were smarter than the people who just got mad and banded together to say how bad life was in the boycott community. They've gone to the Spirit Airlines page and actually filled out reviews. They've said things like, the worst experience ever. And they try to make it so difficult that people just give up. And here you can see how they're better than these other folks. Well, not me, Spirit. I'm smarter than you are. You can see them saying this. I just filed my complaint with the U.S. Department of Transportation. I am relentless. So you can see they're using the language of I. I'm better than they are. I'm smarter than they are. I'm not going to put up with your poor service. I'm going to be relentless, and I'm going to go to the authorities, and I'm going to call your bluff. That's the kind of thing that level 3 tribe members do. And you can see fewer people in this tribe, just by virtue of the numbers here, but people, this resonates with them, and people begin to band together and tell the other stories that tribe members tell in this sort of I'm smarter than they are mindset. A level 4 tribe member, and again, you're going to find all of these tribes in your school. These members are going to pass through, but your overall climate and culture is going to have a certain tribal feel. You are either going to be more of a tribe 2 or a tribe 3 or a tribe 4. What's interesting is that these tribe 3 people, to be better or smarter, they need to be better or smarter than somebody. Guess who they're better or smarter than? The level 2 people. They view themselves as the leaders of the level 2 people. So level 4 people, this is where groups become self-aware, and they have the idea that we're better than they are, that we can band together, we can go out and find things to help the group, and we can become a better tribe by helping each other. And so when you think about that values idea, that requires a little bit of self-awareness, because they are our values, they're shared. And so there's a we that's a part of this. And so level 4 tribes they really have these values, and so the values are important to them. And so this is a picture of this is a picture of the founder of Virgin Atlantic, and it's Sir Richard Branson. So Richard Branson started Tower Records. He actually, in this picture, is the leader of sort of a defunct, struggling student newspaper. And by running the student newspaper, you can see he's the type of person who has strong values. And at this point in time, he wasn't Sir. He was just Richard Branson, and he didn't own any airlines. He was just a kid. What's interesting is that he ended up on a flight that was canceled. And while sitting at the airport, he turned around and said, "Oh, this stinks. We all need to get where we're going. How about we charter a plane? I'm going to charter a plane. Are you with me? Do you want to get home?" And this is a true story. Sure enough, he got everybody on that canceled flight riled up and together, and they chartered a plane, and they flew home when the airline wouldn't rebook them and didn't have any options to support them. And so in that moment, sort of a tribal leader emerged, but they had some shared values around getting out of an airport, the idea that they deserve some customer service here, and that they could get out and get home to where they really wanted to be, and they banded together and they made it happen. And that's characteristic of level 4 tribe behavior. What's interesting is that level 5 tribes, and this is the highest level, is this idea that life is good and that there are issues that are really global issues that need to be solved. And so it's no surprise that later in life, Richard Branson goes on to found Virgin Atlantic Airlines, Virgin Records, and a number of other brands and products, which really he views as getting at the heart of issues for consumers. So building on that experience of a few airlines having a monopoly, being able to charge any prices and sort of treat customers any way that they wish, Richard Branson later in life reached out to create an airline that solved those problems. And so you see that he evolves into this level 5 tribe member, but also a leader, because in his ability to organize, what he's able to do is to understand all these different tribes, but then to find solutions and to move folks by virtue of the language and the solutions from one tribe to the next. So it's really important. The takeaway here is that as a tribal leader, you need to understand that these different tribes exist, and you need to approach values from the sense of a tribe that's going to be able to work together, not smart guy against not smart guy, but really as at least a self-aware group around shared values. Because as these shocks occur, it's going to affect everyone, and if everyone can collaborate and think of solutions and look at the accepted practices and then think about the organizational sort of threads of execution, you are going to fall into alignment and be best adapted to handle this change of next generation science standards, but also that future change. And so there are some distinct characteristics around these tribes, which I will sort of sum up and share with you right here, is that oftentimes the kind of language that you see among Stage 1 tribe members in a K-12 setting is the idea of being isolated, that children have no chance, that it's me versus them, and this profession is really hopeless. That's in a K-12 environment, that's the kind of language you see from Stage 1 folks. Stage 2 folks often have a view that is somewhat jaded, that there's system politics, class sizes are too large, that there's a lack of resources. And so while not all of education and not all students are incapable in its entirety, that the particular situation that this person is in is really an incapable situation. It's not, it's super needy, it's just really incapable of success because of all these things. That's the kind of Stage 2 tribe language that you see. And so life is bad. Life is bad where I am, where I'm teaching, where I'm principal, or where I'm a district leader. Stage 3 people tend to have sort of a view and language that is perfectionist and critical and easily overwhelmed and really looking for the black and white in everything, because they're looking to measure themselves against a standard, and a standard which is very black and white. And so Stage 3 people are going to measure themselves against Stage 2 peers and other Stage 3 members. They're going to say, well, I'm better than that person who's a self-appointed expert because of all these things. Or I'm clearly the leader of these other folks who, they're just jaded. They think it's the class size. They blame the professional development. They just aren't kind of as smart as I am. That's, in essence, the Stage 3 coming up in folks. In education in Stage 4, what we see are folks who are really motivated by their values, and they really understand that they are the best individually, not only because of their individual, what they bring to the table individually, but really what they bring to the table as a group, because together we're stronger, and together we can support each other, and together we can kind of give each other permission to be idealistic and to try things, because we know that we value things over ourselves individually, and that when we do make mistakes, we can rely on each other for help and for reflection, and to also not only help in the moment, but help in a path forward. And this is where we see incredible movement and success, and the opportunity to go really anywhere is at Stage 4. When Stage 4 tribes, when schools are Stage 4 tribes, anything can happen in a positive way, really, and almost any challenge can be overcome. And so it's important that you really see or try to at least get your group to a Stage 4 level. Life is great. Stage 5 is, in education, what we will see is often very, idealistic and sometimes naive approaches to big issues that can often be disconnected from reality. And so while people are, in the best of intentions, striking out, that it may be striking out in such a way that there's not really a probability of success, but yet there's this very autonomous nature to Stage 5 folks that they need to kind of strike out and do it anyway. If you think back to Stage 5 when I was just talking about Sir Richard Branson and creating Virgin Atlantic Airlines, not everybody who's been delayed on a flight strikes out and starts their own airline. They don't. and most airlines fail. And in fact, Sir Richard Branson failed many, many, many times, made mistakes many, many times, and really saved his airline from bankruptcy over and over again until it really became successful. And so that's the plight of a stage 5 tribe member, is to really experience a lot of unfortunate sort of learning curve aspects. And so it's not to say that it's not a good thing to be stage 5 versus stage 4 or whatever, but it's important to understand that there are certain traits that can actually really be something to be aware of and overcome in that stage 5 process, and to expect that you're going to be alone and have to deal with a lot of trials and mistakes. What's interesting is that, and this is something from our experience that we posit, that the distribution of tribal stages that we see, while sort of David Logan's work says that the average is around stage 3, that we tend to see a skewing towards stage 2 in large urban districts and large schools. And in suburban environments where schools are smaller and the focus is less around meeting basic needs and more around beyond basic, that we see a shift towards stage 4 folks. And so it's important, and that doesn't mean that it has to be that way, by the way. It just means that you have to be aware of it. If you have a high-need urban district and the engagement point is around data and rigor, then people are going to be looking for ways to boost data. They're going to be looking to plug and chug. They're going to be looking for silver bullet sort of operational modes, which aren't going to focus on values, real purpose for education, unless those values are there and are articulated and take the place of things like data. And that's not to say that we don't live in an accountability world where standardized tests matter. They do. It's just that we don't value the data. We value teaching and learning. And so what is involved in teaching and learning that we can all work towards, which is bigger than ourselves, that carries us through every day. It's the reason we get up and we tee up the ball and we swing for the stands no matter what. The data is meaningless. Nobody believes in data. And U.S. history, and I've given this example before, is a great example. Nobody marches off to war or puts their life on the line for a 50-cent increase in minimum wage. Okay, that's data. But they do march off to war and put their life on the line for freedom of speech and for justice and equality and these big things that are really bigger than any one person, but which we hold high and believe and esteem and are greater than ourselves, and which we can only accomplish together. So you have to think of it that way. You have to get away from a focus on trying to get a stat up and trying to get purpose infused, because when purpose is there, the data comes up. The data is actually a symptom of it. And so that gets into a much deeper discussion in terms of test creation and what tests actually test. And I don't want to really get into that right now, but nonetheless, it's something to be aware of. The last piece, and I'm going to take questions here in a second, is to really think about preventing and recovering from mistakes. And again, failure is when you walk away, or failure is when there is no chance or probability for success. A mistake is simply an opportunity to learn. It's something where someone was naive or circumstances that was not accounted for occurs, and we need to move forward, learn from it, and do our best to prevent that from reoccurring or involve that information in our next steps. So let's just take a quick look at this. The first piece is to realize that there are basically 3 stakeholder groups in every school and district. First and foremost, it's the teachers, the educators, the folks who are actually interfacing with students. Students being the learners. Now, teachers are learners too, but I'm talking about the students as learners in this case. So teachers, learners, and then supporters. Administrators are supporters. Parents are supporters. Community program folks are supporters, okay? All of those folks are supporting teaching and learning. Okay, so you have to understand that each of these groups has their own unique expectations and opinions, and it's very important that we synchronize them and we create synergies. You can imagine that an after-school program, by borrowing the language of next generation science standards, the practices and the processes, and mirroring the modes of instruction in the classroom, are actually, if it's a wraparound program, are effectively increasing time on learning, simply by being aligned, by synchronizing with the values and also the language that takes place in the classroom. So this is where closed loop communication comes into play. And you can imagine the teacher interfacing with that supporter group, and that supporter group then interfacing with the students. So the student is getting reinforcement from the classroom as well as the wraparound program, but this extends to parents. You know, parents are excited about their students engaging in scientific thinking and using the practices and processes appropriately and engaging the vocabulary. So if you share that with them, guess what? They're extending time on learning. And at the same time, they also have an understanding of the objectives that your school has, what you value. So these are all pieces of communication, okay? And there are all kinds of little subgroups within each of these bins, kind of. Okay, closed loop communication is important. I'll just say that there is such thing as open loop communication, and that's where you break one of these connections. So this is classic at this connection right here. When you have people who support, let's say someone who supports STEM education, who's disconnected from the teachers, they're telling the learner something, and the teacher's telling the learner something else. They're getting one experience in the classroom, they're getting a different experience after school. And then that creates tension between these two groups because they're at odds, and confusion among the students. Parents in wraparound programs want one thing, teachers want something else. At least that's the way it kind of appears when that connection gets broken, all right? Or you break this connection and you have supporters telling teachers what to do with no understanding or impact directly with the students. It's another great example of open loop. When mistakes happen, it's really important to de-escalate. And, you know, as you make all these shifts, people are going to, whether it's a teacher or a student or a parent or an administrator, people are going to find that their expectations were not met. And so that's an opportunity first to de-escalate by going back to the values. What is it that we value? 2, it's what is our mode of instruction? And 3, how are we executing that? And so de-escalating is first and foremost not, you know, it's a series of triage and questioning, and I'm going to show you how that kind of looks like here. So it's a learning process. So what you want to do is look to the root of the issue really in 3 areas: the processes, the practices, and the understandings. And so this first group of questions is around triaging the issue itself. So let's say that you implement a new curriculum and everybody says, oh, there's no content in this, there's not enough content. Well, you have to ask yourself, first of all, what is it they're taking issue with? What do they mean by content? And what do they believe will solve that issue? Is it that we need more pages to read? Do we need is it that there's not enough for the person to explain, that they're used to explaining a lot, and so they're taking issue that it's not their job to get up in front and talk and lecture folks? What is the source of their understanding? Is it their past experience being in a traditional mode of instruction? Is it coming from a district where traditional instruction is really the only instruction? It's that's what they wanted, that nobody valued inquiry, that nobody valued the idea of critical thinking or putting students in the role of scientist or engineer. Could it be that their understanding of the standards is out of date? Could it be that their understanding of the standards came from looking at test items? Many people, unfortunately, it's really a low skill set, try to understand the standards through the assessments. It's a very backwards way of understanding, instead of appealing to the standards documentation itself and then going to the standards and trying to unpack that. The second group, so this first group is around triage. The second group has to do with that flow that we were talking about earlier, from why we do what we do to what we actually do and how we do it. Is it an operational inconsistency? Is it a case where the details of execution need to be refined? So that's an easy one to solve. Or is it an issue where the mode of instruction, this is the result of an alignment problem? Something's misaligned with the mode of instruction. This would be an example of somebody being upset with a colleague for, using worksheets, or a parent coming to you and being upset that there's not enough textbook reading. Well, you can turn around and say that, what's being advocated here, or what somebody's doing, is out of alignment with the mode of instruction that reflects the values of our group, of our school, of our district. And then the other question is to look at what's being suggested, or what's being identified, and understanding how it reflects or it affects our values. Okay, because these are easy places to correct individuals and have important discussions, but also to reinforce the core of what and why and how we do what we do. Okay, and the last piece really has to do with understanding individuals and being the leader that's creating this change. So thinking about what tribe this individual or individuals subscribe to. What is the language that they're speaking? Are they speaking the, my life stinks, that I'm better than they are, that we're great, they're not, that, there's this huge problem and I need to fix it, or that this is impossible, that life is just terrible, and it just can't be successful in any possible way. Understanding that language is key, and then being able to speak to a person who's in that language, understanding what they can hear. So the language that individual can hear is going to be vital, that you identify that and that you can communicate that to them. So again, thinking about the smarter than you are parent coming with the idea that we need textbooks with pretty pictures and that students need to read them front to back every night. I'm smarter than you are. That's probably not a scenario you've ever seen or heard of in your whole career, but believe it or not, those sort of things happen. You need to be able to understand that person is communicating some expertise, and you need to meet a self-perceived expertise with your values and from the perspective of your expertise and your role, not trying to one person trump another, but really de-escalate it by communicating what we as a group, as educators, are teaching students with inquiry, and taking how we're accomplishing the same goals of that textbook, but at a much higher level, and actually help to improve the understanding of the expert that came to you with a suggestion. And so by doing that, you're de-escalating, you're creating clarity, and you're hearkening back to all these other pieces. Okay, that's how we get this situation where students are able to be in the role of scientist and engineer, to learn in the context of these, in the same classrooms, but in the context of these next generation modes of instruction, where they can really be scientists and engineers and perform expectations and engage in the discipline by developing and using it with skills, or developing and using skills to access and develop and use the content. So as you kind of think back on how to be a helpful leader, your values will keep you focused, and the idea that they overlap is going to help promote buy-in. And by being clear and open, and also one who's connecting one tribal group with the next, in this effort to sort of refine the values and the modes and the operational sort of execution, what's going to happen is that not only will your leadership improve and actually build, but the quality of the teaching and learning in your building and those that you interact with is going to improve as well. And so that's where I'm going to leave it for this webinar. I'm going to take some questions if you're on the live session. I'll hang around, and I apologize, we've gone a couple minutes over here. Feel free, on the right side of your screen, there's an area where you can drop questions in if you have any. I'll do the best I can. If they're extremely specific, feel free to email me. I will give you my email here. It's fvigent@knowatom.com, and you're welcome to email me. You can also go to our website, and under About, there's a Contact Us. You can submit through the Contact Us a question. You can reply to Mary Ellen on an email, and she'd be happy to forward a question along as well if it's something specific. I do, while you're coming up with those questions, want to give you a heads up that there are a number of resources available to you if you found this at all helpful, or you'd like to know more. Again, I'm giving you little segments of lots of different things that are really very deep topics, many of which we've covered in other discussions, in ebooks, in blog posts, and all over the place. You can go to KnowAtom.com, KNOWATOM.com, and if you click resources up the top, there's an area in there where you can look through ebooks and webinars and all kinds of different things that have happened. They're all free. You can download them. You can subscribe to our blog. You can view our blog up here. Subscribe, just click subscribe. If you're interested to see what next generation science curriculum looks like I said, KnowAtom's focus is really around next generation science standards and curriculum, but leadership is a key part of this. Where there are not strong leaders, where leadership isn't willing, or at any level, leadership has to exist somewhere to align to the values of next generation science standards. That is a non-starter, but we work with leading districts, and we're really pleased to have that opportunity. You can see the kind of curriculum that we have developed that reflects next generation science standards under STEM curriculum. There are also some free professional development workshops that are going to be made available shortly if they're not already available under resources. And you're welcome to join by going to info.knowatom.com/upcoming events, other webinars that are coming up live, as well as past webinars which you can watch on demand. And this webinar will be available on demand in a couple days. You will receive an email with a link, most likely from Mary Ellen, to this webinar, and you're welcome to share that with others as you wish. It will be videoed with the slides and audio, and I am happy to take a few questions if there are any. And I'll put my information up here as well. Okay, so far, despite all the people signed in, we have no questions. There's an awful lot here to process, and I understand that, and I'm sure that's a consideration across the board. Something that we hear often is, what is a value? And again, it's important that you think about something like the Declaration of Independence or the U.S. Constitution. The Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution really put forth, or Bill of Rights, put forth really big ideas, things that unite us. And again, I'm using a United States model, so unfortunately, if you're not from the United States and you're on this this webinar, I apologize. This probably has considerably less meaning to you. But for those of you who are joining us from the United States, to think about the idea of freedom, the idea of the freedom of expression, for some people, the right to bear arms, these sort of, the idea of liberty and life and the pursuit of happiness, all of these pieces which, unite us and define us as a nation on paper, but really almost in our hearts. If you were to meet somebody anywhere else in the world, if they were Americans, most likely they would share these sort of core values in some form. And so that's something, again, that not only unites us, but it's something that carries us forward in terms of the way that we organize ourselves. The modes of, justice, the way that, due process, the idea of, how we treat one another, and acceptable business practices and safety practices, and all of these sort of things are, those values are reflected in those places. And then, of course, how that actually gets carried out, of course. Acceptable punishments when there is an infraction against the values is something that's, clear. Things that the United States, as citizens, that, we are willing to support or not support in terms of punishments are oftentimes places where people look back and say, well, we're Americans. This is something that we all value. What is really the mode of carrying out those values within the justice system? How do we carry that out operationally? And so, the debates we have every day really reflect this as Americans in politics and elsewhere. But in our schools, it's the same thing. And so as you see this shift in next generation science standards, you're going to see a shift in how people start to have these conversations. You're going to see a lot of sort of the grinding of the gears. And so by being aware of these pieces, you can really be aware that of what's coming, but also not have the sense of anxiety that you're entirely in the dark. There are these methods, and so I hope as a result of this webinar that you'll have an opportunity to go back and to view portions and share them with your team that you find most important. And again, if any questions arise, and again, we still don't seem to have any, so we'll wrap up this webinar now, but if you do come up with any, be happy to address those or to point you in the right direction with some ideas if that is helpful. Thank you again for joining us, and if you are on the live session or if you are in the resource section, do please subscribe to our blog, follow us on Facebook. It's facebook.com/KnowAtom, or follow us on Twitter. The handle is @KnowAtom, KNOWATOM.com. Thank you again, and I appreciate your time. Bye now.